Pan searing, this is the baseline. A hot pan, usually cast iron, where the steak makes full direct contact with the surface. That contact is what builds a deep, even crust. Because the heat comes from one side, you get a strong contrast between the crust and the interior, which stays juicy if you manage the timing. Fat renders along the edges, especially if you press the fat cap into the pan. This is the most controlled way to cook a steak, and the easiest way to get consistent results at home. It works best for steaks that are not too thick, where you can build a crust without overcooking the inside. Grilling. Heat comes from below through open grates, so instead of full contact, the steak sits over flame and moving air. You do not get a continuous crust like in a pan, you get separation. As fat drips down, it hits the heat source, burns, and rises back up as smoke, settling into the meat as it cooks. That is the flavor people associate with grilling, not the lines. It is less precise than a pan, but that trade-off is what gives it character. This works best when the steak has enough fat or thickness to handle that open heat without drying out. Charcoal grilling. Looks similar to gas, but behaves differently. The heat isn't steady. Some areas run hotter, others cooler, and that naturally creates zones without you having to think about it. You can sear hard, then slide the steak over, and let it finish more gently. At the same time, charcoal burns drier and adds a subtle layer of smoke that builds as the steak sits over it. The crust comes out darker, more aggressive. The flavor has more depth. If gas feels too clean or controlled, this is usually where people start to get more out of it. Open flame cooking. Now you are working with actual fire, not just heat. Flames move, flare up, and hit the steak in bursts as fat drips down and ignites. One side can char quickly, while another cooks more gently, and that unevenness is the point. You are not chasing a perfectly even crust here. You are letting the steak pick up variation, some deeper char, some lighter areas, a bit of smoke layered in as it goes. It is harder to control and easier to overdo, especially with thinner cuts. But with a thick steak, that shifting heat adds texture and complexity instead of ruining it. Reverse searing. So this flips the usual order. Instead of chasing a crust first, you bring the steak up slowly at a low temperature until it is almost done, then finish it with a hard sear. The inside cooks evenly from edge to center, so you do not get that thick gray band you see with high heat. Then the final sear is quick and focused, just building the crust without pushing the interior any further. It takes more time, but honestly, it removes the biggest risk: overcooking the outside while waiting for the center. It is especially useful with thick steaks where, precision really matters. Sous vide. This is control taken all the way. The steak cooks in a water bath set to an exact temperature, so it can't go past the doneness you choose. The interior comes out even, edge to center, because it heats slowly and gently. But out of the bag, it doesn't look like a steak. No crust, no browning, just a pale surface that still needs to be finished hard and fast. Sous vide is less about building flavor during cooking, and more about, guaranteeing the result. It's what you use when consistency matters most. Broiling. Heat comes from above. The top of the steak is hit directly by a very hot oven element, so it browns fast while the rest cooks underneath it. There is no flame interaction and no smoke coming back up, so the flavor stays cleaner, closer to pan cooking than grilling. But it is still aggressive. You don't get much margin for error, and timing matters more than anything. The advantage is simplicity. No pan, no grill, just direct heat from above. Butter basting. So, this isn't really a separate method, it actually happens on top of one. Once the steak is already searing, you add butter to the pan, and as it starts to foam, you begin spooning it over the steak again and again, coating the surface in all that hot fat. That fat, it carries heat and flavor, picking up those brown bits from the pan and layering them right back onto the meat. Over time, the surface develops this deeper, slightly nutty richness, that you just don't get from dry heat alone. It's especially useful on leaner cuts that don't have much fat of their own. Smoking. This one, it really slows everything down. Instead of chasing a crust right away, the steak just sits there in low heat while smoke builds up around it and gradually settles into the surface. The flavor, it develops over time, not in a single sear. It's less sharp, more layered. And because the temperature stays low, the inside cooks evenly without squeezing out much moisture. But the surface, well, it never really gets hot enough to brown properly. That's the trade-off. You're building flavor first, texture later. Usually it needs a final sear to finish. Caveman style. This is about as direct as it gets. The steak goes straight onto hot coals, no grate, no barrier at all. Heat hits from all sides at once, and the surface starts to char almost immediately. Honestly, it looks pretty rough while it's cooking. Ash sticks to the outside and flames flare up, but that layer just stays on the surface and brushes off after. Underneath, the meat is still intact. Because the heat is so intense, the outside develops super fast while the inside takes a bit longer to catch up. Timing really matters more than anything here. It's not clean or controlled, but with a thick steak, that aggressive crust and slight smokiness are pretty hard to replicate any other way. Cold searing. The steak goes into a cold pan. As the temperature rises, fat begins to render slowly, and moisture works its way off the surface before any real browning happens. You flip more often, keeping both sides moving so nothing overheats too quickly. That gradual buildup gives you more control over how the crust develops, especially on leaner steaks that don't have much fat to buffer the heat. The result is more even color and less risk of burning the outside while the inside catches up. It works best with thinner or lean cuts where high heat can go too far, too fast. Deep frying. The steak is fully surrounded by hot oils, so heat hits it from every direction at once. There is no hot spot. No single surface does all the work. The entire exterior cooks evenly at the same time. Because oil transfers heat efficiently, the crust forms quickly and uniformly without the patchiness you sometimes get in a pan or on a grill. It is fast, almost deceptively fast. A few seconds too long and the inside moves past where you want it. It is all about timing. Torch, finishing. Now, this is not about cooking the steak. It is about refining it at the end. A culinary torch applies intense, focused heat, building color in just seconds without heating the rest of the meat any further. That makes it really useful after gentler methods, where the inside is already exactly where you want it, but the surface still needs some work. Instead of relying on a pan or grill, you are targeting specific spots and bringing them up to a crust. It is pretty precise, but easy to overdo. Too much time in one place and the flavor turns harsh. Indirect heat grilling. The steak is placed off to the side of the heat where the temperature is lower and more stable, so it cooks more gently as heat moves around it. The surface does not brown much during this phase. That is not the goal just yet. Once it is close, it is moved over direct heat to finish with a proper sear. It is basically the grill version of reverse searing, using distance from the fire instead of an oven to control the pace. This method works especially well when the steak is too thick to cook straight over high heat. Finishing in the oven. This usually comes after a hard sear. The steak starts in a hot pan to build the crust, then moves into the oven, where the heat surrounds it more gently. That shift changes how the rest of the cooking happens. Instead of the outside getting darker and darker while the inside catches up, the temperature rises more evenly through the center. It separates crust from doneness. You lock in the surface first, then bring the interior up without stressing it. This is how a lot of restaurants handle thicker steaks. Controlled on the inside, already finished on the outside. Every method gives you a different result. The difference is knowing which one to use. Let us know what we should cover next. If you enjoy clear breakdowns like this, hit subscribe for more.